Today, I'm going to unbox and take a quick look at Seas of Thunder, Global Naval Warfare 1939 to 45. This is from GMT Games, which was kind enough to send me this copy, so thank you. And it's a game designed by Jeff Horger, Charles Mayer, and Neil Sobolski. Hopefully I pronounced those names right. And it's my understanding that this is loosely based on War at Sea and its Pacific counterpart, Victory in the Pacific. But I don't know if it's a full port over from those games. I think that there's some general concepts in here as far as like area control and victory points based on sea areas, and that it's really solely focused on the sea and not the land aspect of World War II, because this is 39 to 45, so we're looking at World War II here. But I think the combat might be a little bit different in some of those mechanisms. Also, those two games were separate. One was for the Atlantic, one was for the Pacific. There was I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a company that combined the two. Offered kind of a combination or a full packet of the two together. But those were basically the same games, but with a combined rules. This one is the entire world, or the global, as it says, global naval warfare. This is the entire globe from a naval warfare perspective. So again, it has, I think, some similarity or owes some influence to those earlier games, but this is its own game. That's my understanding. Most of what I've learned about this game is just over the last few weeks, as this was released and people are putting up some content about it, and so I'm reading more about it. This is not something I was tracking on the P500 or something that I really even knew what it was about until it came out. And but once it came out, or once it was released, I started going, wow, this looks interesting. I'm a big admirer of War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific, and what it, the unique and novel nature in which it brought some concepts and some gameplay to wargaming. I don't want to go into a whole rant here, but I think that there were some definitely Euro mechanics that were introduced by those games long before there were, Euro games, or at least that title. But that's a whole nother topic. So I was interested to see what this game does with that. I mean, it's going to have, again, some similar features. It's got its area control. There's going to be victory points based on the areas, and there's going to be asymmetric victory points based on whether you're the Axis or the Allies. So it does share some aspects and, again, DNA from those earlier games, but it's taken it to its own place. So let's a nice thick box here. There are a lot of counters in this box. I mean, you have all the naval forces, or most of the naval forces. I'm not going to say they have all, but quite a bit of the naval forces from 39 to 45. Here's an example of the board, and we'll do a full layout of the board. Now, right off the bat, you're going to say, well, this looks odd. They've skinnied down South America. As a cartographer, at least I have a degree in geography, but maps always intrigue me, and I'm always kind of looking out and see how they portray it. The land masses are not ideal. However, my understanding of what they're trying to accomplish here is the land is kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's these sea zones, and having enough space in these sea zones, for example, like the Black Sea, is exaggerated, but you need to have it so they can have enough areas in that sea zones to do to put counters in there. And so the land masses are really there for point of reference and for ports, because this game's really big on everything goes back to port. So the ports are very key on where you locate your forces, and then having them come out of port, do the combat, and then go back to port. The location and how you report and move stuff around is going to be very important. So the land masses are really there for port of reference. How do you like that? So there's really not a lot going on them. There's some holding boxes here for land-based air and stuff like that. But again, the ports are really the only key thing about the landmass as well, and to give the outline so they can at least where you have some relation to where those ports are and where those neighboring sea zones are. So I'm not put off by it as much as I think some people are. It does look odd, but if you've studied a lot of maps or seen a lot of maps over time, there's a lot of different perspectives on maps and a lot of different ways to look at the world. And again, if you follow my channel, I'm all about different perspectives and looking at things differently. So a different map is not going to scare me away. So here's an example of the counters here. It's for 2 players. It's 2 to 12 hours. Complexity is a 4. And Victory at Sea and at War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific, those are probably 4, maybe even 3 complexity. Solitaire is a 6, and its age is 14 plus. So 5 counter sheets, more than 1,400 playing pieces and markers. There's a lot of counters in this box, and this is my understanding. This is, I think, is a mounted map board too. So you got a mounted map board of the world, even if you really have never seen it that way before. Anyway, let's get in this box and take a look here. Let's see what we got in here. As I said, this was kind of a surprise. I was not tracking this. I was not following this at all, and GMT has been kind of doing that with me lately. Again, I do look at the P500 from time to time, and I look at the GMT updates, but this one just slipped by me. I was like, what is this? And then I started looking into it and go, what? And then when I found out it had some DNA to War at Sea, then I was like, oh, that's interesting. What are they doing with this? So anyway, here's the box. Nice thick box, and it needs to hold those over 1,000 counters, almost 1,500 counters. Here are your rules here. And we have 36 pages of rules. So really, this is for complexity. We have 36 pages of rules. Well, let's see. See what this is all about. Here's your table of contents, game terms and abbreviations. Here's an introduction. Let's take a quick look there and see if there's anything it says about its background. That might be in the designer notes. So you've got opposing sides. Here's the components. Here we go. Let's look at how these counters read out. So you have the ship name, you have a silhouette, you've got a gunnery rating, a survivability rating, and a range. And the range is the movement. And then some of these counters are going to have special capability values. So like that on an aircraft carrier, I imagine that's its air capability. So some of these units again are going to have some special capabilities, but not a lot of numbers on the counter. And again, that range is going to be important because again, you're porting at the end of every turn, so you need to have a pretty good range to get out to take over those areas, those sea lanes or sea areas that have again asymmetrical victory points. Here's the port maps. And so the port maps are going to be important because they're going to be, you have those ports on the board, but then you're going to have some player aids in here that are the port maps. And that's going to tell you how many units can be there, but it's also going to tell you what nationality of the different units that can be there. And if there's any like land-based air or something that can be there. So these port maps are really a key component of the game, and they're an off to the side sheet. They're not on the board itself. So some examples of the symbols there. And that gives you an example of a sea zone. Like it's going to have a number. And then the allies point value and the access point value. So that's something from the good old War at Sea. You have these different victory points for it there. So here's setup, sequence of play, rules of play. Again, this is double-sided. It's color with some images and examples, it looks like. You have a standard rule and an optional rule, so maybe that's the ratcheting up some of the complexity. There might be more of a basic game and then a little bit of an optional game that goes along with it. Here's combat. That looks like the most pages I've seen so far. Here's control of the sea zones. So if you're both in there, then you don't have control, so you're not going to get the victory points. If you're the only one in there, then you're going to get, if you're the Allies, you get the Allies victory points. If you're the Axis, you're going to get the Axis victory points, and so on. Here's inspection, scoring, return to base, the repair track, winning, and variance. So all totaled here, the rules are only 10 pages. So you don't be scared by the 36 pages. That's the game right there. The first 10 pages is the game. And then you have these scenarios, which are going to be, different setups and maybe different victory conditions, and you do different things. And I think that what they're doing is they're trying to cover different aspects of the war, different periods, because 39 to 45 is a relatively long period. So I think they're probably going to chop it up into a little bit more bite-sized chunks. So here is scenario 1 is Raider Warfare. So that might be more of an introductory type thing. Here, scenario 2 is struggle for the Middle Sea. Scenario 3 is, what is that, drumbeat? Yeah. Scenario 4 is red sun rising. So I imagine that's going to be the Japanese coming into the war. Scenario 5 is shattered sword. Scenario 6 is Neptune's Inferno. So, quite a bit of scenarios here. Scenario 7 is red sun setting. So probably towards the end of the war in the Pacific. Scenario 8, World War II at sea, the campaign game. So 7 scenarios for different aspects of the map. And then you have scenario 8 is World War II at sea. So this is probably the whole kit and caboodle, the whole game. And then here's combined scenarios, linking 2 or more scenarios. So you can, I think there might be a way to play these linearly in a row, chronological. I don't know. It's late when I'm filming this, so I need my coffee, but that's for the morning. So that's how you can link the scenarios. Then you have examples of play. So on page 25, you have a full example of play here, or at least, oh yeah, this is nice. So you got laying out all the forces, where to set them up, and then you've got how to do the combat and the like. And this is the real aspect. We'll get to that when we get to that chart, which I see it peeking out underneath the rules here. The combat is different than in the War at Sea. War at Sea was kind of a dice fest. You line up your ships, the number of combat factors, I think, was the number of dice you roll, and you get hits on a 6 or a 5, or maybe it was just a 6, but it was one of those ones where it's a bucket of dice and just applying hits, and if you got more hits than the other ship's ability, then, or defense or survivability, whatever they called it, it would go down. And so this game is a lot this combat system in Seas of Thunder is much more elaborate. Not overly complex, but definitely a more elaborate system, and this is taking it through it, because there's different types of attacks. There's surface line, there's airstrikes, anti-submarine, submarine, raiders, and they kind of go in order or in a sequence. And, depending on what happens, some of those ships will go to reserve, and then that means they just go back to port. And some of them might stay in the area, that's where you want to end up. You want to end up with your ships staying in that sea zone, because if you're not in the sea zone, you can't get control. And if you can't get control, you can't get the victory points. And that's the name of this game. So here's an example of all that. And then some images down there as well. And then we got the designer notes. So this is the one I'm going to definitely read this to find out. Over the years, I played War at Sea, Victory in the Pacific, the Avalanche, Plan Games, Bismarck, Jutland, Submarine, Silent, blah, 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 blah. So this is where these designers are telling about some of their inspiration for the game. So I definitely will read that at some point. I like reading the designer notes, especially historical notes, because that's why I play these games. So that's that. So really, you're 10 pages of rules. So maybe that 4 complexity is spot on in that regard. All right, so let's look inside the box here. So this is that combat chart, and there's two of them here. So you can set up your forces on both sides. But you're going to follow the kind of this. It's not. It looks kind of like a decision tree, but it's more of an allotment or a sequence of play. Like air superiority is going to go first, then airstrikes, then anti-submarine, and then based on what happens, some of these ships will fall down, or the ships on the other side. Because you'll have each side lined out on these charts for combat in an area. And depending on what happens is going to tell where these ships end up. And, you kind of want to end up in remaining in that sea area, right? So you can get control. And that all depends if you're end up in the in one of these boxes at the end of the whole combat. So it's going to follow in this order. So the ships that for if you have land-based air or aircraft carriers, then air superiority, you're going to have to look at this box, and it shows you the kind of units that are involved here. There's a CV, so for aircraft carrier. So this is the type of units that would affect this box. Here's the type of units that affect this box: anti-submarine, and mine warfare and submarine warfare. So that just submarines are for that are really affected by that box. Raiders. And all classes end up here. This is for your surface line here. So it's a really interesting combat system, and this is probably the maybe what pushes it to a 4 on complexity. This is probably the most complex aspect of the game, but it's really not that complex once you understand what's going on here with these boxes and how they kind of flow. And they even give you arrows to show you how it flows. So that's the interesting part. That's totally different from War at Sea, the combat system, and how it works and how it's showing the interaction between the different types of naval units. Now we're going to get a lot of these port maps. Here's the Allied port map for Scenario 1. So these port maps are going to be unique to the different scenarios because there are different periods of time from 39 to 45, and so there were different ports available. There were different ports owned by different people. I mean, like once France fell, then its ports were Axis, right? And so the ports might change ownership or ability to have different factions or countries be occupied or hold units from there. So this is the Allied port map for Scenario 1. And so these boxes here will match up to the ports that are on the actual board. But this is where you keep when you go back to port, this is where you're going to keep your units. This shows you how many units you can have in these ports. This shows you what kind of units, like this can have British ships and then British air and the like. And so U stands for unlimited. So you can put as many units as you want there, but they still have to match up with this nationality. So you've got North Atlantic, Mediterranean, Western, West Pacific, East, South, Central. So these are Turkey, Indian Ocean, all the different ports. And here's your sequence of play for Scenario 1. So you're going to have that kind of right off to the side too. This is like a little player aid. Not only does it hold your ports, but it tells you your sequence of play. So that's Allied port for Scenario 1, Allied port map for Scenario 2. And again, as you see here, some of them have changed. So there might be some more available, and so some of the ports will change over time. Here's for Scenario 3. And again, the scenarios are somewhat in sequence, and then you can, again, at the tail end of those scenario rules, you can link these together. But these are the different ports depending on what scenario you are playing. And so then we go over to, this is Axis port for Scenario 1. Oh, and these are double-sided. I messed that up. So these are double-sided. So look there's a lot more ports there for Scenario 6 for the Allies, because a lot of this is bringing in the United States. And then it's interesting, you've got a lot of the Latin American forces and navies over here too. So this truly is a global game. You're going to have a lot of different types of forces. That it's not just all British and Axis or British, German, Japanese, and American. There's going to be some other forces coming in here. So here's Allied port map for 7. sorry. Yeah, that's Allied port map for 7, and then here's Axis port map for 1. So you can see right away that, for scenario 1, Axis don't have the same level of ports, or the same number of ports, so they're somewhat limited right there. And it's probably going to get worse. Let's see what this turns into. Actually, they get a little bit more here. The Mediterranean opens up. And then on the back is the Axis port map for scenario 5. And then scenario. So these port maps, and they're on a little bit thicker stock. So these are, again, are a very key aspect of the game, almost as important as the map board itself. Not quite, because that's where the victory points are, but this is where your ships will have to go at the end of each turn and then pop back out. And you don't have to go back to the same port that you started with, and so that's why you can keep track. That's where that range comes in. I'm trying to get out to get to certain areas, and and do combat. So that's where this game lies. That's really the whole game, is trying to stage your units from certain ports to get to certain areas that you think you can get the advantage in combat to obtain the victory points. So a lot of port maps there. Okay, and then here comes a whole bunch of counters. So we got, how many sheets of counters do we have here? 5 sheets of counters. So there's a lot of blue. Right there. And to get a little bit closer on some of these, here's some CVs. So they have a special ability there. Then we have, those are all US. And when they go on the board like this, so you don't necessarily know what is contained in that fleet. So you got a little bit of fog of war going on there. And then when you do combat, you're gonna find out what you bit off. Hopefully you didn't bite off more than you can chew. Some more ships here. I mean, there's a lot of ships here. A lot of counters. Again, that's another reason there's a Soviet Union, United States, Italy. So that's another reason why this kind of surprised me, because this is such a kind of an epic game. I mean, the entire naval war, World War II naval war, and with all these different counters, all these different units, and all these different countries and represented. I thought I would, be on top of that. These are Japanese and British. You see there. Kind of small print. I mean, nothing that we're not used to if we played games like this before, but very clear counters. A little small in the print there. This looks like some more British here. I'm guessing Dutch. Yeah. A lot of British. Then we get some German. Then we have some minor powers here. So we've got Argentina, Turkey, Romania, Cuba. Got one counter there. Chile. And here's France. Love that. We got one Cuba. And we got Brazil. Let's look at the Cuba. Not that scary. There you have that. So, and then we get into the map here. We'll take a look at that in a second. Then we got a bag of dice, a lot of dice. I mean, there's still a lot of dice rolling in this game, but but the way that you line out your forces for combat are really totally different than those earlier games. I still like those earlier games. Don't get me started. So I think this is going to be a pair of pants board here. Yeah, so there's your pair of pants. Let's pop this out. And there's this double-sided, so that's interesting. So you've got, I have to go up, periscope, which is appropriate for a naval game. So this is early war. So you have early war, Seas of Thunder, early war there. So what we got? Here's your map key to tell you about, like some of the designations. Here's an Allied repair track. Here's available land-based air. Here's used land-based air for the Allies. And then you have the same thing for the Axis, I would imagine. Yes, that's Axis up there. Then you have all these areas, and when you go through combat, you're going to start at 1, which is way up here, and then work your way all the way around the map to this right here, which is 121. So I guess there's 121 areas. So that's a little bit of a time consume right there if you have a lot of combat, just working your way around the board. And that's something that was in. I believe that War at Sea had a similar thing. You had to go through each area. So the land is really, the land masses are really there for, to give you an outline, so you know a general area where the sea zones match up. But really they're there for the ports, because you're going to be coming and going from there to get to these, luscious victory points, wherever they may be. You've got your the Allied reinforcement, game turn, and Axis reinforcement on here. There's the Axis repair track, and they're facing different ways so that Axis will sit on that side of the map and Allies would sit where I am standing here. So that's early war. So you're going to have some different ports and some different setup here. The map doesn't change. This isn't Pangea, right? But the ports are probably going to change a little bit. Then we have late war. Oh, flip it over here. And the reinforcement track looks longer, and it shows you the game turn, so 11 to 25. So the other one, I didn't look at that, but I imagine that was turns 1 to 10. So this tells you which turns, and these tracks here might refer to the different scenarios, those little green bands. And there's some bands on the counters, and that I'm assuming that the color bands that are on these counters match up with maybe the color bands that are on this track, which matches up with, I believe, the different scenarios. Because remember, there's 7 scenarios plus a campaign game. Here's your anti-air die rolls. And that's probably, don't know if that's just dealing with ports or that's probably whenever you're using land-based air or aircraft carrier stuff. So there you have it. That's the late war map. And this is interesting looking. This is, again, this kind of came out of the blue, out of the wild blue, or out of the foamy oceans. And I was not expecting this. So, but this is what you get in a box of Seas of Thunder. Quite a bit in this box, and and look at all these different port maps. Most of this game is port maps. Look at all that, and then we got your combat maps here. Then we have your rules, and don't forget the dice. And there you have it. That is what you get in a box of Seas of Thunder. Sorry for going over a little bit longer than I normally do on these unboxings, but that kind of gave it a little bit of an overview. Please don't try to play the game based on my overview. Besides, there's only 10 pages of rules, so read it yourself. But I want to give a little bit of an overview and feel for this game, because it does look very interesting. And again, a big surprise to me. And really, I'm kind of excited to get this to the table now that I have it unboxed. Love to know your thoughts on this. Did you know about this? Have you been tracking this? Are you interested in this? Do you have it? Have you played it? If you played it, tell us about it. Tell us what you think about it. And if you're looking at this and going, God, it's not your kind of game, well, that's fine too. If you weren't a fan of War at Sea or Victory in the Pacific, or just don't like the look of the map, all fair game as well. But let us know your thoughts on that. Let's just be civil. Anyway, That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for stopping by. And the best way to know that you stopped by is, yeah, you guessed it, comments. Put comments down there talking about this game or anything that's on your mind. Again, just be civil. Take care. Thanks for watching.